Alrighty, so now that we've got the project set up, right, and we have this hub scene, I definitely encourage everyone, before you start working, make sure that you play and you can run around the character's working, right? He's not flying around in T-pose, or you're just getting errors and you can't actually run the game. Make sure you're at this step where you can actually run the game and run the hub scene before you actually start building your scene. All right, so a little bit about this project, right? The ASCORE folder, this has all of the pieces that make up all the systems that you've been given. So basically, stay out of this folder. Feel free to open up any of the scripts and explore, but don't necessarily change anything in that folder just yet, right? Mostly everything you're going to be doing is just inside the scenes folder, right? So inside the scenes, we have the IND229 folder, right? And the reason why I have a subfolder is this project template you're using, you're going to be using the next 3 months, and we make iterations and revisions. So again, if you retook this class last month, we've made some changes since then. So make sure that anyone's repeating also grab the latest project. And this is just going to be a project that you're going to be using moving forward. But this IND229 folder, this is just stuff for this class, right? So inside here we have these 4 scenes, right? Entryway, rigid bodies, visuals, and wind turbine. Those are 4 of the experiments / assignments that you're going to be working on this month. So is anybody familiar with Unity's multi-editing feature? A few? 1 or 2? All right, so we're definitely going to make use of that this month, as well as in this ASCORE project. Right, you're going to be basically having multiple areas physically connected, but be in different scenes. So if you've ever played, GTA, Assassin's Creed, Crackdown, Grand Theft Auto, any of those, big open world sandbox games, that whole world wasn't built by one designer or one artist in one scene, right? That's a collection of scenes that are loading and unloading dynamically, right? So if you're close to an area, you see that area, you don't see across the city when you're not there, right? There's just not enough processing power, as well as what's the point, right? There's no reason if the player doesn't see it. So what we're doing is a very similar thing. You're going to have different areas, and you're going to physically connect them, and the player or the user is never going to actually know where student A leaves and student B begins, right? It's just going to all be seamless. So to get started with that and just learn the basics, we have these scenes, right? So IND2 visuals, this is the scene you're actually going to be working on for your visuals assignment. So if you double click on this scene, it's going to open up just that scene all by itself, right? So if I open up the hub here, and if I drag in, instead of double clicking on the scene, if I go ahead and drag it into the hierarchy window, you're going to see it opens multiple scenes, right? So now I see everything in this scene here, as well as everything in the hub scene, right? 2 scenes open at one time. This is very, very helpful to make sure things line up properly. So to make your active scene, right, you right-click on the scene itself and set as active. So what this means is that anything that you create or anything that you put into the world is going to go into that scene. So when that's my active scene, you now see that those letters become bold, right? So I know that. So if I create a cube or an object, it's going to go into my visual scene. All right? So before I get started, before I actually work on anything or change anything, I'm going to come to Perforce. Right? So in my project here, right, you're going to see here's that scenes folder, and there's that scene right there, IND2_visuals. Right? There's that scene file right there. Unity also has that Show and Explore feature. Right? So if you right-click on a file and hit Show and Explore, this will pop up a File Explorer window that shows you that location of the file, right? Again, file location actually matters, right? The project is referencing files and assets in specific locations, so if that location moves, that connection gets broken. That's why you might see prefabs that are all pink, right? Or everything is missing a texture because the location of that texture got moved or is now missing, right? So the location of this actually matters. Right? So basically what you want to get in the habit of is thinking to yourself, what is it that I want to work on? What is it that I'm actually going to change? Go to Perforce and check out that file. Right? I can't stress that enough. Is start to be conscious of what it is you're actually doing. I know with Unity there's a lot of moving pieces, but starting to develop that sense now is just going to set you up for success in the future. You know, I was helping a student in the online Unity lab. If anyone's not familiar, check out one of the first assignments. We have a Unity lab available to everyone, campus or online students. You can go and just get any help with Unity, as well as they're pretty familiar with Perforce. One student basically, I was like, all right, let's go to look at the script where you're having this issue. And he pretty much said to me, how do I know that I wrote that script? And it was really no answer for that, because there's just that understanding of when you're creating something in the editor, it's being put in your project, right? Or in your project is just a folder structure on your computer. So you have to just start to be aware of what it is you're actually changing, right? So you'll see here is the Unity file, and then down below is this other file. It's the exact same name, but it's called .meta, right? So you'll see everything in here has a .meta file associated with it. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to go ahead and check out the scene and the meta file that's associated with it, right? And that's going to go into my change list here. So what the meta files are, those hold all of the dependencies for that asset. So the best example that really utilizes the meta files are a prefab, right? A prefab is a collection of other game objects or assets in your project, right? You may have a script, a sound effect, an actual mesh, a texture, a material. All those things are on a game object that point to somewhere in the project, right? That if you look in Unity, they point to one of these specific folders to where all those pieces are held. The meta file actually holds that data about where those are located. So the best thing that you can do for yourself is anytime you're changing something, check out the meta file as well, so those changes get accounted for. So now with my visual scene checked out, I'm free to start actually working on it. So I'm going to come back to Unity, and now in the visual scene, I'm just going to be creating some of the level blocking meshes and explaining their strengths and why you should be using them over the Unity primitives. Right, so this level blocking meshes drop-down menu right here, everyone should see. This is not an update to Unity. This is part of the project that we're giving you. So if you look inside ASCORE, here is this level blocking tools folder, right? This folder right here. If you ever want to take this tool with you to another project, you know, personal, you know, another project in school, or, you know, something for your final project or outside of school, you can just take this folder and put it into another Unity project, and these tools will work just as they're doing in this project, right? So this is part of, you know, coming to school here and being a Full Sail student, you have access to this tool. So you'll see that we have some primitive options here. So if I'm just going to go ahead and create a level blocking cube, right, and notice that cube got put right into my visual scene. You'll notice a few differences about this object, right? And I'm going to create a Unity primitive as well. All right, so you'll notice with the level blocking mesh, right, the first thing that you see here is that we have this small little pink ball on the corner of the object, right? So if you click on this, you have another transform widget, so you can actually move. Right, so when I move this, I'm actually changing the scale value of the object. Right, this is just another easy way to build geometry, right? Rather than typing in the scale value, you can just very easily click and drag and maneuver this wherever you'd like it to. One thing you may also be noticing is look what's happening to the texture, right? As I'm moving it, it's starting to repeat or tile itself, right? That's because these pieces of geometry actually have UV coordinates, right? Something that you're not responsible for, a designer, but that's what allows those to actually pick up whatever texture is being placed on it. So if I go ahead and take the exact same utility grid that we have here and apply it to our level blocking or to our Unity primitive, if I go ahead and make this larger, right, I'm scaling the object just like I did the level blocking mesh. Notice what it's doing with the texture, right? It's trying to conform that texture to stay the same size as the object, right? No matter how big or small, it's going to just stretch that object to fit, or that texture to fit on the object. So there are ways to get around this, right? On this, you could say, well, I want this to tile twice as much. So I'm going to come to the material and change this material tiling. So now it's tiling better, but notice how it's affecting every single object that has this material. Right? If I turn it back, see how everything's changing? This is what we want to avoid. You don't want to have, say if you have a brick texture and it's on 4 different walls, you shouldn't have to have a different material for each one if it all looks the same. The level blocking meshes allow us that control, and we have that adjustment right on the mesh itself. So going down to the object, right, into the game object, you'll see that we have the mesh renderer, right, that's just what you see, right, the cube itself. And then we have this level blocking mesh script, right, this is just created on the object when you make a cube, right, make a cube, it's got that component on there. Here you have that texture tiling ability, right, the ability to adjust it right here. So if I change this to 2, it's going to tile on this object specifically. Same thing goes for position. We can show this when we actually grab an actual texture. You can use this to actually adjust where the texture is located if you want some fine control, right? But this will allow you to, no matter how big or small the object is, the texture will tile and repeat itself very nicely, right? So that's one strength that you get is when you actually go to put textures on these look more high quality than, say, the Unity primitives. So no, you're not going to get, this isn't going to allow you to take Unity and turn it into Maya, but you have a lot more control now, and as well as it looks finished. Another thing you'll notice about the difference between the two of these is their pivot point, right? So on the level blocking meshes, you notice that the object pivot is on the corner. So this may not seem like a big deal right now, but it definitely helps in adding speed to actually building and blocking out your level. With the object pivoting from the corner, you can very easily rotate from that position and start to build different shapes very easily, or different connections from that corner, right? It's all pivoting from that section right on that corner spot there. The level, or the Unity primitive, however, notice how it's pivoting from the center, right? You have this button up top here. This will toggle between the object's pivot point and the object's center point, right? Well, with the Unity primitives, that's the same thing. Unity just puts the pivot in the center. If we look at the level blocking mesh, we actually can go to the center of the object or to the pivot, right, which is predetermined. So an actual asset that you'll find, an artist, or even a designer, can go into Maya and set where that pivot location is, right? So when you're actually building your level, you have more of that control. So try and go ahead and have this be at the center and try and build the same corner, right? You'll notice yourself just doing more actions. We rotate it, you have to move it into place one way, move it into place the other, and there's a lot more work that goes into just having it logically placed at the corner. Another thing to make note of, you may see that I'm snapping the objects along the grid. I definitely encourage everyone to use the snap feature, which is control on the keyboard, right? So if you move the mouse back and forth, right, without pressing any buttons, you'll see that you start to get these decimal places building up in your positions and even your rotations, right? It's much better to work with whole numbers than decimals, right? So if you get off the grid at any point, you can always hit snap all axes, and that will round it for you. And then if you hold down control and move with your mouse, it will snap on the grid, right? And you can set those values. I'm pretty sure by default it's 1, so 1 in every direction, right? And it's going to snap along that grid. So I highly recommend using that when you're building your scene or any level. It really puts that level of quality up to the next standard, rather than having small little tiny gaps and things like that and all these little imperfections. Snapping all your geometry together is going to make your life much easier. All right, so that's basically the cube, right? It's pretty straightforward, just like the Unity primitive, except you've got more control having it pivot from the corner, as well as this to easily adjust the size or the scale value, right? And remember, these are much better for texturing, which will go forward after I talk about some of the other shapes. All right, so level blocking meshes. We also have some other ones. So the wedge is one that's very popular that Unity doesn't provide for us, but we have built with this shape here, right? So small little ramp. You could use this as a collider for stairs or any type of incline. Again, they all have that same little pink gizmo there to control the size of it as well. All right, moving into some of the other ones, I guess the slope is similar to the wedge, except it's not an actual full triangle. It's just more of a rectangle that has a flush corner. All right, so you can do pretty nice things where you have it something like that. All right, so it'll end up really flush against other pieces of geometry. And inside this, you have the height and the width, right? So the slope height is pretty much how tall or short it is, and then the width is the overall thickness. All right, so be careful with some of these sliders, but if you type in a value, that's the actual thickness of the slope itself, right? So you can end up with a lot of really intricate shapes with just some of these primitive objects. Some of the other ones are self-explanatory. The arch, this is probably the most customizable shape of them all. You can do a lot of different settings with this to get different results. So you'll see down here we got the same thing, texture, position, and tiling. Here is just a checkbox for if it's squared or rounded, right? So you can make a rounded archway if you want. The sections, this basically is the number of faces in the arch, right? So if you count there, you'll see here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So if you increase this, it's going to be smoother, right? Less what we call faceting, where you can see where the geometry touches. So be careful with this. If you're making a small little pipe on the wall, you don't need to jack this up to 100, right? It's just not necessary. You can leave it relatively low for efficiency, 10 or 8. But that's what that's controlling, is the number of actual sections. The radius, this is the overall radius of the arch, right? So if I increase this, I get a larger arch, but the actual thickness stays the same. The start and bend angle, this is pretty much where the arch is starting from and ending. So if I want to make a full pipe for, say, the player to walk through, I would increase that to 360, right? Or you could do a quarter, it would be 90, really any value you want. You can get different shapes out of. All right, and then we've got the width. So this is the actual thickness of the archway itself, right? So if you want it to be a little bit larger, you can increase the overall thickness. So a lot of different uses for that. So play with some of these. Definitely get comfortable with them, and know that you're going to be using these to block out an image, right? So you see the image in FSO, and I'll put it on the screen quickly just to talk about it. This is the image that everyone's going to be recreating to their best of their ability, right? So what I want you to focus on this when you see this image is the overall proportions and major structures. You don't need to focus on the small little debris and the things in front. Focus on the walls and the overall supports and the structures of this environment, right? I'm using this just to evaluate where you're at with Unity, right? I want to see that you've set up your project on Perforce and that you've recreated this as best as possible, right? So break these down into basic shapes, right? Like here's a cube, here's another one in here. Break it down. Here's probably a few wedges. You could break this down into an arch, right? And use this as your base, right? If you're zooming in here and you're like, man, I don't know how to make that twist. That looks a little weird. Modify it. Take what you see in the image and then improve it to make it feasible inside the actual engine. Another thing I'll point out now, while we're here and just looking at the image, is if you want to expand upon this, right? So if we're standing here looking at the image, if you want to take more of this wall and then continue it further to encapsulate what the player will actually see, I will encourage you to do so. Not a requirement. I'm just looking at what you see in the image. But part of being in games, right, rather than film, right, if we were creating a movie, it doesn't matter what's over here to the left or what's behind us. It doesn't matter at all because this is what the camera sees. But in a game setting, it's not the case, right? Especially a third-person game like Scraps is, we have the ability to move around and look around. So what you should be doing in terms of your own mindset is taking this image and expanding on it, right, and just adding more, elaborating to it. I've seen some people take this image and search it in Google and actually find the physical location or other ones in the past. So if you want to get more information, you can, but you can take this as a base starting point and expand upon it further. But what I want to see and what I want everyone to focus on, and don't stress yourself out and be like, oh my God, he wants to create this whole thing. Just focus on the structures and the major objects and getting your proportion right. Right? If I walk in here with the player, I shouldn't be, this tall up to the doorway, right? It should be proportionate to the actual character. That's what I want you to be focusing on, right? So build all the structures first. Build everything that you want for the overall scene before you actually texture anything. So I definitely encourage everybody to do so and practice with that, as well as be submitting to Perforce, right? So I've been working on my scene. I've made some objects. I'm going to go ahead and save my scene, come back to Perforce, and then hit submit, right? Come right to my change list and submit. And I'm just going to say in here, blocked out visuals assignment. And then submit, right? And then very quick, not too painful, just going to come back to these files again and check them out. So I'm going to keep working on it. So a resource that I encourage everybody to start to utilize and at least peruse through is a website that is linked in the assignment that is just textures.com. It used to be called cgtextures.com, but this is a very, very helpful website. You do have to create an account. It's completely free, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and log into my account here. And how this works is basically you get 15 credits per day, right? And you get them for free, and then basically you can use those credits to download textures, right? So if you think about it, you get 15 different textures a day, bless you. Within a month or two, you have a pretty large texture library, right? If you do this for a while, you can pretty much end up with a good library at your own disposal. So say I come into the brick category here, and now there's subcategories. Let's see, I want to go with I guess cinder block, and let's go with dirty because scraps is post-apocalyptic, so let's go with something there. And now we have all these different brick textures to look at, right? So let's go ahead and take this one here. And what you want to pay attention to, right, is that it's seamless, right? So it's going to tile and repeat very nicely. So I'm not expecting you as designers to make your own textures, but you should be able to look at them and see what encapsulates your vision, and not so much just, oh, it needs a texture, let me find the first one that the search results give me, right? These pretty much all of them have this preview option, so they'll allow you to see what it looks like when it's going to tile, right? You'll see some of them are only going to tile one direction, like this brick wall here. So I'm going to go ahead and download this one, right? So down here, right here, the small one credit. We'll download that one. Let's go and find one that tiles two directions, right? And let's hit the little preview just to see that it looks like. Because some of these you'll see that they don't look as good as others, right? Some you're going to tell that, oh man, I can point out where it repeats over and over again. Others are better, right? So just take the time to take a look at some of the ones that you're selecting. And now that they're downloaded, I'm just going to add them into my Unity project. So what I recommend everybody doing, just to understand the concept of where your files are going and how to submit them to Perforce, I recommend creating a new folder for each assignment. You don't have to do this. I encourage you to, though. So I'm going to create this visuals assignment, and any texture, any material, anything that I find on the internet or any other resource that I want to use for this assignment, I'm going to put into this folder. So these two textures right here, I'm just going to drop them right into that visuals folder. All right, and I'm going to be disciplined and rename them. So I'm going to say brick 01 and brick 02. All right, and now these are textures, right? These are just image files. What you put on geometry is an actual material, right? So I'm going to say, let's call this M underscore brick 01, so I know that's the material, right? And now here in the albedo channel, this is the diffuse or the color. You're actually going to assign your texture, right? What you want this object to display, or you want this material to display. Now with the material, you assign that to an object. All right, let me go ahead and set this back to 1. All right, so you'll notice with anything that's one way, like this object I found here, that you start to notice this candy caning, right, or the striping. Set this to 3. Right? So this is pretty much meant to tile this direction, right? Pretty much go on forever one direction, not two, right? So recognize that. So how you can adjust this to fit the object that you want really breaks down into your scale value and breaking down the texturing, the texture tiling to compensate for that, right? So the scale value of this wall here is 3, right? Is a value of 3. So for it to tile, we want to take the inverse of that, right? So 1 divided by whatever your scale is, right? 1 divided by 3 is a third, so 0.333, right? Put that in the x as well as the y, right? And now that texture is going to conform to the size of that object, right? So if this was only 2 units tall, we would change it to 0.5, right? And it will fit to that. So you get a lot more control with, rather than let's take this brick material and put it on this object, right? Now we want to make this bigger, right? Now you see the problem. Now that it's no longer a grid and a more finalized texture, that's the issue you're going to get with the Unity primitives. So it might be blocked out and look great, but then you put materials on it and you have a bunch of other issues, right? So same thing goes for, let's make brick 02. Put my folder. New material. Assign this brick and apply it here, right? So what I recommend doing is applying it to a few different objects and then adjusting the value, right? So let's make this one, tiling a value of 1, this one's 2, and then let's put this one at 0.5. So definitely use the character to your advantage. If at any point you want to move the character, feel free. Just do not ever rotate him, right? So I can move him. If you want to move him, it's just as core character container. If you want to move it just to test, feel free, but don't rotate him. You can see what might happen if you do, right? So now, if it's a little dark, I'll use my flashlight, which is F. Use the character as a reference, right? Walk up here and what feels natural to the character, right? If you've got the scene and it looks right in the image, that's definitely part of it, but using the character and their overall proportions to see, okay, is this brick the size of my head, or is it tiny, or does it feel, accurate? The character itself is going to be a big reference point, so make sure you utilize that. Right, and now you'll notice here, you see these are 3 separate objects with the same material with different texture resolutions or different texture tiling. All right, so once you've got your scene created, right, definitely focus on the meshes. If you look at the rubric, the meshes and the structures, that's the biggest chunk of the grade. Then focus on the materials and actually getting everything set up properly. From there, you can go forward and start to adjust the lighting. I don't get super detailed into looking at if your lighting is perfect. I just see that it exists. So if you want to adjust the lighting in the hub scene, that's fine, right? Just remember, I'm going to come to, before I change anything, I'm going to come to the hub and check it out. All right, and now say I want to come in here and let's go ahead and make this our active scene. All right, and now I can just take this directional light here and say I just want to change the color, right? Or also adjust the angle of it. Feel free to do so. If I turn that on, it shows me the lighting of the scene. All right, get it resemblant of the scene itself. It doesn't need to be exact. I just want to see that the lighting exists, right? And then you'll see the camera, right, is what I'm evaluating you from in terms of what you've built. Is this player icon right here, right, which is in the visual scene. Go ahead and move that wherever you'd like me to stand to view your image, right? So you may want to have it, somewhere right here where I stand there and I look at your scene and compare it to this, right? It needs to be resemblant, not exactly perfect. Obviously, the better or close, more accurate you are, the better off you'll be. But that's just resembling the image that you've created. All right, that'll be all what you'll actually be working on, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save my scenes, right? And let's go and actually submit my work to Perforce, right? So I have all these files here I checked out, right? I have the hub scene and I have the visual scene that I checked out. But remember, there was some new files I added as well, right? So always get in the habit of adding your new files, right? Those are in my visuals folder, so I'm going to mark that for add, right? And now there's those image files as well as my materials. So now they're all on my change list. I'm just going to go ahead and submit that. I'm just going to say working on visuals, scene, and adding materials. And then submit. So I should see at least, 3 or 4 revisions on your actual scene. That way, if anything goes wrong, right, if you're working on your scene and your project crashes, you have a backup version of your scene to go to. Really just get practice checking out those files and working on them. Then when you're actually done with the assignment, so just a little bit more to cover, so bear with me, and then we can go on break. When you're actually done building the project and you want to turn this in, we want to adjust the build settings, right, to include both of these scenes. So what I'm going to do, come back to Perforce. Now build settings are in my actual project settings. So I'm going to come down here to Editor Build Settings and check this out. Right, because that's what I'm actually going to change. When I go back to Unity and go to File, Build Settings, if I change anything in this window, that is what I'm actually changing this file, right? If I go back to my, where is it? If I go here, I'm actually changing this file, right? It doesn't seem very apparent. You don't go to, File, Save, Build Settings. It just happens. It just happens in the background when you save the project, right? But this is what you're actually changing. So you want to check out that in Perforce first and then come into here. So what you're going to do now is go ahead and hit Add Open Scenes. Right, so you want to include the hub and then the scene that you want to load. So for the time being, let's go ahead and remove the LD student. We don't need that. We want to include a build of the hub and the visual scene. Well, let me explain something, because what we have here is we have the hub scene, and then we have this game object here called the Ascore Level Manager. This has a script on it that is looking for other scenes in the build settings, and it's going to load them additively, right? So if you're repeating this class, before you'd have to actually go in here and type the name that you wanted the Ascore Level Manager to load in addition. We've removed that step, so it's going to do that automatically for you. But that means you have to have the hub scene be the index 0 in the build settings, and then the scenes below are going to be referenced in this level manager. So what I want you to understand is still the same concepts. Now that we've taken this step away, still understand the build settings. This is every single scene that's going to be included in your executable, right? When you buy a game from the store or buy a game from Steam, in that executable, right? So let's say it's a game like Angry Birds, right? You have your tutorial level, right? That's a separate scene. You have level 1 through 20, right? Each one of those is a separate scene. Maybe you have your main menu scene. You have a credits scene. All those are separate scenes. They're not loaded at the same time, but they all exist in the executable, right? They're all present in the application or on the disk. So that's what we're doing in the build settings. They're all going to be in the executable. So the reason why they're loading additively when we go ahead and build this is this level manager here. So it's loading the hub scene, and then if you want to go ahead and open this up, you'll see on start, it's loading additional scenes, right? So if I go ahead and hit build, it's going to ask me, okay, where do you want to make a build? So what I recommend everyone doing, if you want to make test builds and throw them on your desktop wherever you'd like, that's totally fine. But remember, everything's going to be submitted into compiled. So what I recommend you doing, and you can even do this tonight while you're here, you don't have to turn in the assignment, is go ahead and create a folder. I'm just going to call this last name, first name, and then the name of the assignment. That's pretty much always my naming convention. It's just last name, first name, name of the assignment. So I'm going to create a folder inside of the compiled visuals folder, and I'm going to save it inside of here. All right, so I'm going to name this. All right, and now when I hit save, it's going to make the build for me. And the reason why I have you put it into a folder is because when this is done, it spits out two things, an executable as well as a data folder. All right, so the data folder is very similar to the library, where I'm saying you don't need to know what every single individual file does inside of it, but you need to understand that with the data folder, it has to be there in order for the executable to run. So if you just turn in an exe to Perforce and I try and open it, it's going to tell me you can't open it because no data folder was found. So we'll just give this a minute here, and it should be compiled. Any questions at all so far about the latter half of the lecture, about the level blocking meshes, about making an executable? Hopefully you guys have made an executable before. Yeah? Question?
On that compile part, are we supposed to, when we're pulling it out to check out, are we supposed to have our own file in there, or are we taking the whole compile and then?
You're saying to check it out?
Yeah, the compile folder.
You don't have to check out the compiled folder at all. When you're just adding a new file, it's a good question. When you're adding a new file to the depot, you don't have to check anything out. You can just hit mark for add and then submit. You only check out things that already exist on the depot. So you should be checking out your own project, right? I was going in here and checking out my scene,
Right.
working on that, and then going forward.
But the compile part where we add the things together, are we supposed to pull the compile folder then to be able to add it?
You just want to get latest revision to have it on your computer, but you don't need to check anything out in the compiled folder. So yeah, like I was mentioning before, here's that actual exe, right? Here's the application, and here is the data folder. Again, a bunch of files. You don't need to know what these are, but these are required for the visuals to run. So you'll see that's one of the showstoppers. If you just submit the exe, I can't grade your scene, right? Another thing that you want to do before you submit this is open it and test it. I'm doing this myself because this is a new process that we're using. There we go. Now you see I have both scenes loaded and connected. Make sure that this is working. Make sure your character isn't completely broken or that you just load up into a black screen, right? You don't want to have all that work go in, you just make a build and submit and never even opened it yourself. Really make sure that what you're turning in is what you want. Right? Now that that's in place, right, you'll see compiled visuals. I come back to my workspace. And now inside my visuals, there's, I don't know why that's doing that. So the exe is there, so I'm having a visual bug with Perforce. When I hit mark for add, right, there it shows my exe and the data folder, right? So now I can go ahead and submit this. Just say adding visuals, exe, and data folder. And now that's going to submit. Alrighty, so I'll show you now what will happen if you say, for example, you only submit your exe, right? And I run this, you get this error, right? So make sure that you're submitting both parts, right? It'll say you have to have it, and it needs to be named the same. So don't rename your data folder something different. Make sure the names match. And now, say, for example, I deleted off my computer and I want to test what I submitted, right? I'm paranoid. I submitted to the depot, but I'm still not sure if what I submitted is working, right? I deleted it from my computer. Anybody know what I can do to get it back? So get latest revision, but now it's telling me no files updated. Anyone know why? I have to do the force operation, right? So go to this folder, get revision, the one down below, and then force operation. That's just going to copy it again to my computer no matter what. So now everything's copying. That's the best way to test what you just submitted. I mean, you can turn to a friend and say, hey, I just submitted my exe. Can you get latest on it and run it and make sure it works? Make sure you're testing what's on the depot. I'll leave you with this and then I'll let you go to break. So if anyone has another computer, like you have a desktop or another, a PC or something you like to work on, and you want to set up Perforce to work on it, you can use the same username. How it's going to work, though, is each computer is going to have a unique workspace, right? So the workspace you create is connected to the actual PC itself. So that way, you basically, if you go to your, you have your, Andrew O'Connor laptop workspace, and then Andrew O'Connor PC desktop workspace. You print 2 separate workspaces, because then you'll submit to the depot, go to the other, get latest, and then you copy it to the other computer. That's actually a really good way of simulating what it's like to work in a team. It's pretty much having 2 computers talking to each other through Perforce and trying to get them to have the same content. If anyone has access to that, or if you want to work with a partner, like, hey, can you grab my project and see if what you see is what I see, just to make sure you're understanding it, I encourage that. And if anyone wants me to do that, I'll be more than happy to.